Good afternoon once again, and thank you very much for picking our presentation for lunch. Or maybe you will go to lunch later. Anyways, we have an interactive presentation and conversation between product owner and architect. When should we switch to microservices? We'll talk about monoliths as well. Let me introduce ourselves. I am architect. I use DevOps and I am on Java. I have 6 years experience in architecture. When I was a lead, I was also working in architecture. I made other presentations. Catherine? My name is Ekaterina Romanova. I manage projects last 9 years. I've been doing projects in conference and meetings. We also try to organize a meet in Yerevan. So we'll talk about switching to microservices. And we'll use a small company as an example. We have a way to vote. You can use this QR code and we'll see who you are. Are you a monolith, a microservice? Are you in transition? We would like to know that to understand the audience better. In your case, it's monolith with all the microservice disadvantages. A microlith. I don't think we can show the results on the screen, but Aleksey's got them in front of him. The majority are monolith or switching to monolith. So I think what I'm going to present is near to you. Most of you used to be on microservice, and now you understand why we're switching. After this presentation, you will think about perhaps switching again. And there's another option, I don't know. If you pick I don't know, well, then perhaps you'll get a better understanding of what are we talking about, and it's time to change. A small company, it may be existing, maybe non-existent. Let's see when ambitious are growing, when you need to switch from monolith to microservice. Our fictitious company, BuyPy Ticket, this is a ticket aggregator. I'm a product owner in this company, and I'll tell you about our previous experience before this pandemic began and other events as well. Our users could pick tickets offline and then receive them in their emails. And then they could pick them to look through stats, to sell tickets, and we made money through commission. Then, after the pandemics, people started leaving the country, so we were hemorrhaging clientele. Now, as a future-oriented company, we picked a lot of personnel, and then we also called in architect. And now, our Aleksey, he's an architect. When I came on board, this small but proud company had a good monolith with VC pattern, and business logics layer, and Appium layer as well for UI, the single page application. Everything worked fine, and it made money. So monolith is a uniform application where many components are united in one soft, and so everything is in one location. Now, advantages of what we have. Since it's all located in one place, everything is consistent. You can get the database immediately. If it's an error, everything rolls back. This is a huge advantage. Since everything is just nearby, we don't have any network communication. Resources are quite quick, but still it expedites the work. All the code base is in one place, so you can understand how this application works. So initially not much was written when I came on board, and this is quite obvious as that it runs on one single server, plus a couple of more servers we needed if one of the servers go down. And this was not expensive for business. So things worked well, and then Monolith, and then Aleksey started asking, what do we want? So this is small but ambitious company, wants to consume the market and transform from an online aggregator to a service that creates content, and we thought we should move on to international level because some of the Russian speakers agents have left. So our organizers now, not only can they place information about their events, but also have online events based on those online events. Then they can give certificates, signed certificates. Also, they can keep those records, and they can sell access to those records. So they can visit online events from anywhere around the world, receive signed certificates, and buy online events access. And now, what else can we add? Now we have social login, and also we have online transmission and storage record, your personal account, and then the code certification and different options because we have different countries and different limitations and restrictions. When I heard it for the first time, I was so much impressed by this small but ambitious company. But what can I do? I got under their wings, and then they told me what they want. Now this is a monolith. And secondly, the system is going to develop. There are so many wishes. We used to have a small system, now we're going to have a huge system. So we run into certain issues. First of all, as the project grows, the application becomes more complicated. Initially, there wasn't so much logic, but what we had to add a lot, and that had to be superimposed to existing code bases. We used to work with Russia only, now we're working internationally, so the performance is growing. We used to have 8 CPU and 16 gigabyte. Now it's not enough because we are going international. Therefore, we'll need more powerful servers, which is more expensive, several times more expensive. And then at a certain point in time, we might want to use more servers. We'll have to put server stacks. This is going to be expensive and complicated in terms of maintaining. Since the code base is growing, we could do the temporary fixes, or if we do refactoring, this is going to be tough. So, during the refactoring, we might need the complete regress. The functionality and complexity is growing. Regress also becomes difficult. the entire rationale is also becomes more and more difficult. So the code base is growing, number of developers is growing too. We find new developers, but they will work in one code base, and it's difficult because there's so many functions. But we will need to finish those. The functionalities. So what happens when the task is ready? We would be difficult to scale up the performance. So 3 teams working in parallel without code base. This is going to be it. And the last item, which is also quite important. So we do something, and then we need to finish something, like the concept been changed. And then we need to change the business rationale. Now, sometimes this new situation is incompatible with the architecture, so we'll have to work and come out with some temporary fixes. And then this can lead to lots of errors and bugs. Or we start correcting, and that mega refactoring situation will emerge. And each time we have a new input, necessarily that it sits well with the architecture. So when the architect shows up, he starts hating our monolith, and we understand only something has to be done about it. So what should be done about our architecture? More microservices. Well, you have to split the monolith, and the architect will be responsible for it. We do several services independently. Now, how can it work out? First of all, smaller services are easily maintained. Now we get horizontally scalable code because we need a lot of firmware. So a couple of more servers that can work on virtual machines, that's something you buy on Amazon, or a super duper server that you have to wait for half a year. And it's easier to test. Our servers must solve their task. Therefore, testers who work with it understand how it works. Therefore, when the functionality changes, it's easier to understand that something is wrong here. Because only enterprise architecture know everything in a big monolith.
As a new developer steps in, they wouldn't know how everything works together. So our architect brought up architects and microservices. So my question is, what is a microservice? So Aleksey, maybe you could tell us what microservice architecture is. It's a modular approach to software development based on using poorly coupled, replaceable components interacting by standardized protocols. How do we know if we have microservices? They have to be focused, meaning they should be focusing on delivering one business task. If we talk about signature service, it will be its sole responsibility. Low coupling means the change of one service does not affect the others. There could be refactoring, of course. If we want to add a new type of signature, it should not affect the document microservice. High cohesion service should contain all tools to address a task. If we come back to the certification service, for signatures, all methods should be in there. We must avoid a situation where to get a signature it has to approach other services to pick something up. High cohesion does not imply that that service contains everything. It can communicate with others, but everything necessary to do a task should be there. And this service really has to be small. The code database should be small. 100,000 line code no longer qualifies for a small service. Once an architect made a speech on microservices, we are still not sure what benefits are there for our solution. So, let's talk about the pluses or the benefits of microservice architecture. We obtain better stability. Downing of one service will not make the whole system unaccessible. People will continue to buy tickets, event tickets, although we may not be able to issue a certificate in time. Diversity of technologies, within reason, of course. It's not like you can choose anything and everything. The cost of mistake is not that high. If you programmed a component and it starts to work slowly, and it has some architectural issues, it worked without synchronization, we just throw it out, reprogram it, make it synchronous, put it back in, and it works fine. We have a chance to update more frequently. With a monolithic structure, it took 20 minutes to update. With a smaller service, it takes a minute or two to launch those services. If our tasks that we send to prod does not affect the update rate. As any architect pitching microservices, with benefits there come some disadvantages or minuses. So the solution that you are selling, does it have any pitfalls? I'm not done with the benefits yet. First of all, a system has to work fast. We used to operate within single service space. Now we have a network communication. So if server works slowly, data used to live in one place. Now it will have to visit other servers. So the system gets complicated by adding communication time, which is not that much. You receive a request, you have to apply to another server to obtain some data there, then go to another server, get some data there. So we have to make sure that the system needs to work faster, have better capabilities. We now have to have a good deploy system, because if we pull that guy out for every update, he will have to be doing it all the time. We need to have some sort of automation in place. With 3 to 4 servers, we can still get by, but with 20 servers, it will be unbearable. We need to have good quality description. Previously, users would look into a code, and it's fine. Now, with this microservices system, API is a public contract. It has to be maintained consistently for other users of the system. With heavier network traffic, greater pressures are put on hardware, so the equipment has to be fail-safe. There's no guarantee that the server is still working when you send a request. So our architecture needs to be set up in a way so that if something goes wrong, the system continues to function. We need to be able to endure and sustain destructions and inaccessibility of systems. And speaking about switching from monolith to microservices, it often gets difficult to break the system down into elements because of high coupling. For example, if we split it up and some of the data goes to one server, other data goes to another server, so there is some work to be done. So with this wonderful switch, does anything change for the personnel, for the engineers, or it's business as usual? Like I said, we will have to have DevOps engineers. Developers, of course, could engage in development operations, but they will have to have proper competences. Several teams are responsible for the server, so we will have a division into areas of responsibility. If we are faced with more difficult tasks, analysts decompose those tasks and they will know where fine-tuning is required. Approvals could be done achieved by team leads. Even though teams are isolated, we need to have clear processes and co-style in place. When we know that one service urgently needs some help, we would know where to send the backup. If we stick with the monolith, everything that you described here, new things, new additions, is something that we'll have to face anyway. Basically, yes. Most of these points will have to be experienced by us anyway. But with the older code, it will be more difficult to do. It sounds like we'd be better off firing architect and continue business as usual, because the way you frame it, it sounds very painful to switch. Yes, that switch is very painful. I'm not suggesting that you should throw everything away and reprogram it. There is a pattern called suffocator, whereby between end users we install a dispatcher that sends some functionality into a still existing monolith and some to a newly established microservice. But new tasks will be programmed with microservices in mind. And we do know how to break our monolith. There are finer points, though. If our monolith is not that great, not that big, you could use a couple of sprints to just redo it for microservices-based architecture. Because here we're adding a dispatcher which does not add transparency. Sounds like a plan. We agreed to switch to microservices, but such a decision has to be made as part of a specific project. So let's formulate criteria for choosing architecture. So let's discuss choice criteria. If you are at a MVP or proof of concept stage, stick with monolith. You don't know where you're going. and where you will end up. If you have clear understanding of what is going to happen, it's not product owners saying we're going to own and conquer the world. Clear understanding meaning that what you program will be used throughout your organization. So if that's the case, you should start looking in the direction of microservices. If you don't have understanding of where to go and you don't know what's going to pop, continue using monolith. But in both first and second points, be careful with coding. You need to realize that a portion of the system may migrate into microservices. Don't make hard couplings, because decomposing those will be hard to do. If you realize that some of the portions of the system will have higher loads, simply put them in separate services. It will be easier to scale. If your team is small, with no big budgets, and you know that building pipelines or reversing service upon demand is not your thing yet, sit on a monolith. Yesterday, they talked about GitLab actions. It's a good thing for deployment and assembly. If you know that some of the portions will be temporary, put them down under separate microservices, because you may reprogram them or delete them from the code. With monolith, it will be more difficult to upend them. This one I'll explain later. Developers typically don't develop several functions. They take existing one and add extra logic. So it will be difficult to develop it in reverse later on. If you know that your app is small and consistency is required, it is still a monolith. Where consistency is key, it has to live in the same place. If you have several services, A, B, and C, and you need data consistency between those, if C is down, you need to send data to A and B to stay consistent. You performed an order, money is issued, but you didn't ship the product, so you have to cancel the order. It's easier done with monolith.
But if you're planning to store a lot of data, then perhaps this should be separated. You start with this relative database, then you see it doesn't work, and then you would need a cloud solution that's easier to do it in one service than in monolith. And thank you very much for your attention. And this is how you can contact. We can take your questions now. Questions? Thank you very much. This has been very intriguing. How much the microservice applicable to enterprise? Like we have a little factory, we're manufacturing something, we calculate the cost, and this is also that calculates salaries. Or warehouse. Basically, there are lots of monoliths. So, what role does it play in automation of factories? Well, let me tell you this. You should consider your business processes. I don't think I can give you an answer. I don't know your business process. After having spent 2 months in the enterprise, having taken a look at those processes, that's when I could tell you what I think about it, because I don't think there's one size fit all answer. You have ERP and they communicate, and you know that it's gonna work, then you can manually adjust your processes from one S to switch to something else, and this is, you can live with it, because digital transformation is very expensive, lots of resources, and you know to know for sure that you need it. If you want scaling up, well, perhaps if things you have is working, then perhaps you should think about expediency. This is not this is a silver bullet, and that's our message is. So when we're working in Russia, it worked. When we had new ambitions and we wanted to go international, then we were thinking that perhaps we need something different, and that it's going to be more expensive to help to support. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. What's the role of analysts during the switch from monolith to microservices, except for depicting business processes, which the business analyst does? Except for this, what else? So your business process is not enough? Or it's too complicated? This is realistic, but that's what analysts do. But what else can an analyst do? Analysts could tell you that this functionality will be developing separately. So they communicate with business, they know which part of system will grow. This is a lot. Analysts understand the future development, and they understand the business processes. It's not that someone's whim, but then you would put it on the blackboard, and then you would see how it looks in the architecture. It's not just that, look, we put everything in a box, we shake it a little, and then we say that we have this microservice, that microservice. Those are huge flip charts on the walls with business processes, and this is how you understand how those things work and how they crisscross and how they are superimposed over business processes. So hopefully the business operation or transaction will need so many changes. So architecture is based on business operations. Business processes primary here. So we have time for one more question. Anybody? Yes, please. Thank you for your presentation. As the result of your consulting, how did you separate the microservices, your application? When we were working on this presentation, basically it overlaps the previous question. I asked him to do decomposition. He said it's impossible, it's too difficult. It's a separate presentation. But it takes a lot from an analyst simply to understand how microservices could be decomposed. But Aleksey may have told you that you would need a signed certificate generation, like this is a separate service. Let me explain this. Here we have use cases, but it reflects what business wants. It doesn't mean that decomposition is needed. We have common parts. So of course I could draw something, but it's not enough. And to draw something, you have to take existing business processes and see how they can be transformed, and then you would say here, when I was talking about microservices, I gave an example about signatures because this is new and it's quite obvious that this is a separate life we're talking about. This is a separate service. But if we take streaming, for example, we're talking about flows and access to flows. So this could be three services or one service. So we could come up with something here, but this would be very debatable, and I don't think this could be regarded as the absolute truth. And because I draw something, then I implement it and I modify it. If I just draw it, this could be torn away from the reality. If it doesn't sit well with the development, then you would have something on paper, a totally different thing, because developers think that decomposition is not needed yet. It works, but it's not a real world picture.